Welcome to our first episode of Sex in the News. And today we're going to talk about a case that's happening in France. And I find it very interesting and actually very amazing on one end, which we'll talk about. And I'm also a little startled because this has gotten not much traction in the United States.
At all.
At all, right?
If at all.
Somebody for the New York Times, whoever is writing a lot of this for the New York Times, I actually think she's French and they're pulling it from her. It has been covering this since September. And then yesterday, so 2 days ago, it was finally in the Wall Street Journal, like a month and change later. So I'll just give you a little bit of a lowdown on what's going on. And then this is so dense and there's so many things to talk about in this in terms of both sexual offending behavior as well as victim empathy and this amazingly brave woman. So I'll just give you the lowdown real quick, and Eli, jump in if I'm forgetting things. So this has actually been going on for some time, but I became aware of it from a BBC article that was posted September 17th of this year, and it's involving a case in France where a French man, Mr. Pelicot, Dominique Pelicot, is on trial at present for raping his wife. But it's so much more than that, which is why there's so much information in here. So the accused, and he has acknowledged this, that the title of the first article that I saw was "I am a rapist," that he admits to mass rape in his trial. So what was going on in a nutshell, and then we'll totally break this down, is that for years, this man was drugging his wife, and so she would drug her to fall asleep and would invite men that he met on a forum to come into his house and to have sex with her while she was sleeping, clearly without her consent. And then he videotaped this.
Yeah, one of the forums, sorry to jump in here, but one of the forums was actually called Without Her Knowledge.
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken. So that, obviously, when we talk more about intention later, I think there's nothing more glaring than that.
Then I'm on a forum that's talking about people having sexual experiences without the other person's knowledge. So there's going to be a lot of consent talk in here today.
Absolutely.
So that's what drew me to this article was the perpetrator actually saying, "I am a rapist," because Eli and I work with people who commit sex crimes very often. And while many of them do admit their guilt or what they've done, many people are not blaring that out loud. And so we'll talk a bit about all of this. But the other thing that is just I love about this case, which just feels weird to say for such a horrific case, is that his wife, the victim, is an amazing, amazing woman and has opted to not keep herself private, to not keep her name private, and purposefully is sitting in that courtroom every day, has asked, and they have complied, to show the videotapes of the rape because the husband videotaped these men raping her, and really has literally what her words are, is that she's trying to turn the shame around from the victims to the perpetrators. So this woman is blazing a trail for victims all over the world and has become just this icon for French women about, turning that around and reducing the shame. And I believe she says putting the shame back on the perpetrator and not on the victim. So, while there's a lot of really horrible offending things to talk about in here, there's also this story of this amazing woman who is really trailblazing and just being like, nah, I'm not. You're going to see it, you're going to watch it, and you're going to be really fucking uncomfortable because this is real life. So, all right. So where do we want to start? So I guess I'll start up and Eli, please jump in.
Yeah, I think we can start anywhere.
Let's start anywhere.
Backwards.
So he in one of the articles I read, and so again, just for references, I've been looking at the BBC, and the New York Times has actually had a lot in this, but in one of the articles, he said that his wife had an affair, and he was so, he had thought about suicide when she had the affair, and he, was so distraught by this was before all the offending and perpetrating happened. And I thought this would be a good place for us to talk about eroticized rage, because that's not something people outside the field, like that's lingo, right? And so
Right.
that's not something outside of the field really talk about. So do you want to take that, or what do you want to do?
I mean, like in particular, right? When it comes to, I think now when we talk about eroticized rage, right? We're not trying to say that only men or only women have this, but because anyone can have eroticized rage, right? So, but essentially, when we talk about rage that is eroticized, right, is something that we are angry about something that happened to us, about a traumatic event, and then it manifests itself in an erotic setting. Okay, so let's just say like angry makeup sex, right? Let's just say
It's not really cool, by the way.
It's not, which is not cool at all.
Right.
Because again, it's just more rough and violent, right? To a degree. So it's just like you guys, a couple is angry with each other, and they have this pseudo controlled or bottled up anger towards each other, and without talking about it, they sex it out. But then it manifests itself in a way that is so angry and sometimes be very alerting during the sexual experience, where someone's just like, what was that? Like, what just happened?
Right. Doesn't feel common. And sometimes eroticized rage will come out. I really think about it as sexualizing the anger, right? And so we have this anger, this hurt, right? Because what's at the root of most anger, right? Some kind of hurt.
Fear.
Or fear, right? Anxieties. And so we have this anger, and it ends up kind of getting fused with sexuality. And we see this sometimes with our voyeurism clients that we work with, people, recording someone in the office because they're pissed off about not getting a raise or something like that. So that anger ends up being sexualized, right? And then turns into some kind of behavior. So clearly, I have not spoken to this man, right? So I have no idea. But I think it's just a good spot to say, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that perhaps he was so hurt, angry, etc., about his wife having an affair, that could possibly be at the root of some of this, is that his anger turned into something sexual and perhaps started him down this horrible road.
Yeah, it's almost as if like this kind of thing was a get back, revenge kind of a thing too. As far as like what transpired afterwards, it kind of seems like, okay, you want to cheat on me? This is really okay. We could take the cheating to a whole nother level.
A little payback that gets completely and utterly out of hand.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But again, like you said, it warps it. The sexualized anger, right? It warps the sexuality or the sexual experience and behaviors. It warps it.
Absolutely, and it's. I don't think we talk about it enough, and I particularly like the angry sex or the makeup sex can get glorified in our culture.
Sure.
And again, based on the work that we do and been doing this for nearly 20 years, like I'm not really a big fan of that, right? Like I don't think that we should be using our partner to work out our anger issues, or then, how it gets into all of perhaps these other behaviors that can actually be offending behaviors.
Right.
So I'm just going to kind of work my way through this case. So, and I don't even know where to start. There's so much, right? So,
I mean, we just
what he was doing, again, I haven't talked to the man, but according to the news articles, is he was going on a forum. They didn't say where, but probably somewhere on the dark web. And the forum's name was called Without Her Consent. And like, hello, that's pretty obvious as to what's going on there. But I thought this would be
it was without her knowledge. That's what.
Without her knowledge.
Well, same thing.
Oh, sorry. Without her knowledge. I just knowledge and consent. My brain get.
No, it's the same thing.
It's the same
essentially.
So, and again, I think this is a great spot to talk about forums, because if the people out there who aren't in our dark worlds, right? They don't know the things that we can't unknow.
Right.
Probably don't know much about what these forums are, and so I thought it would be a great spot to kind of chat about what are these forums, these sexual forums out there, and. When I read this and it was like, oh, without her knowledge, oh, okay, it's a forum for, non-consensual sex. I was not surprised, right, that exists. But Eli and I always talk about we know and we can't unknow. So it's, I don't know, you want to share about some of the forums, or how do we want to roll?
So, I mean, with these forums, I'm thinking that these are going to be forums that are going to be on things like 4chan, Reddit. What's the other one? 4chan, Reddit.
Oh, they change all the time.
Yeah,
Reddit's
there's
a big one.
another one that's popular that I'm thinking about. That Reddit, 4chan, doesn't matter. Anyway, the where any of these, hit fringe forums that you can find, it's just like you're gonna get a bunch of people that are gonna be at least like curious, if anything,
Mm-hmm.
about like, okay, what is this about? And then you go in there and then you find out some things, and then again, like we were just saying, you can't unknow that.
Yeah.
And then but once you're already in that kind of forum, then it's kind of like that sense of camaraderie that you're just like, okay, this is a group that nobody else knows about, that is very hard to find. So then you have a space, which is pretty big right now, particularly with men, I see it. But I'm pretty sure it goes with women as well, where it's just like you find a group of people that you can say whatever you want. And
You connect with, you share interests.
Connect with, you share interests. So that's another layer of this as well, where it's just like, okay, so there are other men out there like this that connect on wanting to have sex, not consensual sex with women or just other men potentially in this form, who knows, but with people, non-consenting sex with people. So it's just like, what is that? That presents a whole nother issue from a social perspective. It's just like, why do these people want to have non-consensual sex?
Well,
what is the deal with that?
That's a deep dive in maybe another direction, but I think that
right, sure.
with the forums, I mean, it's the internet, right? So anything that can be used for good can also be used for not good. And there's forums that are super prevalent, and many people, perhaps some people think Reddit is just news, but Reddit is like, if there is, what is the people call it, Rule 30 of the internet, right? If
Rule 34,
there is a thought, there is porn about it, and if there is a thought, there is a forum about it. And some of them are lovely, and some of them are not. We see clients all the time who are in different forums, and for whatever kink or whatever fetish they have, and there's going to be, like what Eli said, like-minded people. We can talk about it, we can connect, and it kind of normalizes it.
Yes.
And again, perhaps a spot to talk about, rape fantasies versus rape, right? And so what the literature tells us is that people do have rape fantasies, right? People have sexual fantasies involving non-consent. That does not mean they are going to, in fact, rape someone. Obviously, some people continue to do that. But it's the difference between fantasy and reality, right? Some people have that fantasy life, and perhaps a forum like this is a way to work through that fantasy or engage in that without actually perpetrating and, offending against someone and raping someone. But obviously other people are on there who are having non-consensual sex and assaulting folks. Yeah. So he goes, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. It's fine.
So he goes on this forum, chat, finds some like-minded folks, and starts to invite them to his house. And they don't give us great details as to how long this all went on. But so what he was doing is he was drugging his wife at night, dressing her up, and as some of them would say, like in outfits or things, and inviting men to his house to have sex with his wife while she was sleeping, quote unquote, because she clearly was not. She was drugged unconscious. And he would then videotape the sexual encounter, that the men raping his wife. And so with the authorities, when they found out, and we'll talk about how he got caught, when they got into his stuff, into his tech, and were doing their forensic investigation, they found 83 different people that had, on this forum, agreed to come to this man's house and rape his wife, have sex with her.
You got identified, right?
Yeah, there were 50 that were identified, but they couldn't find a whole, 33 of these people, right? So there's so many more people that they couldn't identify. So this is what was happening, right? So they come in, he sets this whole thing up, they come in, he's got these video cameras, and he's taping the whole thing, watching the sexual abuse of his wife. And when the forensic guys went in there, literally the title of the folder he kept all of these videos in was called abuse, right? How are you going to get around that? So he knew what he was doing was abusive. But I think it's a good spot, maybe. There's a couple of things we could talk about here, but let's talk about cuckolding, right? Because that's, again, maybe not something everybody knows about. And, Eli, you want to give us what cuckolding is?
I think it's like a general thing about cuckolding that a lot of, maybe they don't know the term cuckolding.
Okay.
Maybe they know as far as like, you know, wife swapping, wife sharing, or things like that, where it's just like, it's kind of like a meme now, if you think about it, where it's, because especially with, there's a guy, Adam 22 from No Jumper, whose wife is a OnlyFans model. Also, I think they obviously have done pornography together, but he also kind of rose to popularity because he had a porn star have sex with his wife. He actually like broadcasted that, and he's like wanted that to happen on his No Jumper podcast. So just, I do feel like a lot of people know what that is, like get the gist, like get the idea of what that is, which is just like a man who's married, who has a partner, and they want to watch other people, other men, women have sex with their spouse or their partner, and they'll sit there in a corner or sit there behind a clock. This is the mean part of it, right? The partner, the cuck, the watcher, right? He would sit in the closet, look through the blinds, and watch this happening, right? Or
So
sitting
kind of a combo of the cuckolding and some voyeurism, right? But
yeah, voyeurism, cuckolding, and some kind of like, there's some degradation in there too, I think.
so yeah, and it's so I want to make like a differentiation between swingers and cuckolding and then non-consensual stuff, right? Because look, the upside down pineapple community is out there, right? People are swingers. They are, people were having sex with each other's partners. They're having, watching people have sex with their partner. But the swingers community is a consensual community, right? Everybody's there with consent, doing these things because they want to, right? And so in that swingers community, kind of people can work out that cuckolding fantasy or that cuckolding kink in a consensual way, right? Like everybody knows what's going on. You can sit and watch your wife have sex with another guy. Everybody's on board. Everybody's consensual, right? And so I do always want to differentiate like kink from offending, because I don't want people to think like if you've got a kink, you are a sex offender, because that's not necessarily how it goes. Like
Right.
the clear issue here, right, is that, perhaps he has a cuckolding thing. Don't know. We're not diagnosing him. We're just pulling things out and talking about him. But without that consent, right, obviously that's not okay. And that's one of the things that some of the guys who are accused and on trial were saying. They were like, oh, well, we just, like I'm a swinger. We just thought, I'm paraphrasing, right? We just thought this was part of their thing, right? He liked, she would play like she was asleep, and he liked to watch and videotape. And for the folks who watched the videotape, they said it like she's snoring, right? She's clearly not even awake. She's unconscious. And the husband, Dominique, had said, no, these guys knew what they were doing, right? Like they knew that this was, she was drugged. So he's trying to deny their excuse, but perhaps that's what he's into, right? And that's this cuckolding thing. And again, if that's what you're into and everybody's on board, right? Everybody's consensual. We always say, I'm not going to yuck your yum. Obviously, in this case, it's not.
Yeah, obviously, in this case, this is a lot of yuck. And to me, it's just like, there's this, because again, when we talk about the consent and the swinger community and all that, like when you have these conversations, now I'm not a part of any of these communities. However, I'm just stating out the obvious here. You would get consent from both partners.
Yes.
Before the experience, right? You would think that you would be having a conversation with the wife before having this kind of interaction, right? Almost like an interview process, vetting process,
Absolutely,
couch kind of a thing. But
absolutely, and when we talk about these things that go down in the kink community, I mean, there is consent. There is discussions of every piece of a scene. Consent can actually be a written contract. So clearly, she was drugged. She couldn't give consent. She had no idea what was going on. But yeah,
it's just, to me, like the way that in these articles that we read, that a lot of, like, there was at one point where he had the guy undress in the kitchen in order to like not wake her up or something like that, in case he had to run out the house. And I'm just like,
real quick,
because it's just like, okay, if I'm undressing in the kitchen to not wake her up, if she does wake up, why do I have to leave?
Right. That's not somebody pretending to be.
That's not someone pretending to be asleep. If I'm under the guise of, to me, I feel like that's sketchy to begin with.
Clearly.
Because it's just like, if I'm only talking to the dude, the husband, right? Because a lot of the guys in the article were saying, oh, this is his wife. So whatever he says is what, his parent is just, is whatever he says goes. And I'm just like, what?
This actually, I'm going to pull up a quote I wrote down because it, as someone who does this work as a woman, as a human, it kind of horrified me. And in terms of talking about consent, right? One of the people who's accused, one of the defendants, literally said, she is his wife, so he can do anything he wants with her.
Which is wild to me. And that speaks volumes of the lack of...
I have like visceral reaction to that.
Right. And mind you, some of these guys, a wide range of ages.
Yes.
But, I think it was mostly like the older guys that were saying that kind of shit.
And some of them were, I pulled out some quotes again because like with the work we do, consent is such a big thing, right? We're always talking about consensual, and what that actually means. Not no means no, not even yes means yes, but like informed, educated consent. Is that one of the guys was like, well, I don't know what consent means. And well, I think in this case, that's kind of bullshit. I think that brings up a broader question of what is consent? How are we teaching consent, right? And that, if you're only thinking about consent as no means no, well, clearly she didn't say no because she was unconscious, right? And it just gets into all of these pieces about consent. And I'm actually going to read some of the stats. And this is from the New York Times. As some of the things they said from the New York Times, right? And so this is about the French people. The American stats, I don't know if they're better or worse. So, right? Like
that's a good point.
1/5 of the French people say they do not view forcing their partner to have intercourse as rape. Nearly 10% say that forcing sex on someone who is drunk or asleep or incapable of expressing consent is not rape. And among men ages 18 to 24, that number is closer to 30%. So if you're 18 to 24, these French men are saying it's not non-consensual forcing someone to have sex who's drunk, asleep, or incapable. And so I am not clearly a young man. So Eli, do you have anything you want to talk about with that one?
To me, I think it's hard because when it comes to different cultures and different places of where someone has grown up, I could see that being like a cultural thing where it's just like, you don't consider that rape. Because from a general scheme of things, right, a lot of people, when people think about rape or a rapist, is like some guy that's waiting in an alley, grabs a woman, and forcibly has sex with them. So yeah, that's the traditional sense of what pop culture reference of what a rapist is. Right?
And I think even like misogynistic, if you're living in a very patriarchal, misogynistic culture, like I don't even know in the U.S. if there's marital rape laws on books in all the states. I'm not an attorney, but the idea of marital rape, horrifyingly, is relatively new. Right, when we talk about all of this, it's a relatively new thing to think that, oh, just because this is my partner, doesn't mean that I have 100% full access to his or her body whenever I want it, even if they're not consenting.
And there's the thing with people being asleep or passed out, drugged, not necessarily drugged, but drunk or intoxicated is what I'm really trying to talk about here when we talk about the age demographic from 18 and up, right?
And here in PA, like someone who is intoxicated cannot provide consent.
They can't provide consent. So, and I think that's where the disconnect is between consent and what rape actually, and what rape is. And how like they can kind of be relative. Like if you don't have consent, no consent equals rape.
Right.
If you have consent, then it doesn't equate to rape. However, even though someone gave you consent and they rescind that consent, then
which they can do at any time.
Which they can do at any time, right? So it makes and I feel like a lot of men feel as though that's a lot of mental gymnastics. And they're just like, well, listen, from experience, and women like to be sought after, and just because they say no means that they want you to pursue it more and be like, it's just like, what no, like don't, but why play that game if this is also another side of that reality where it's just like if she's telling you no and you pursue to do it anyway and she feels intimidated because you're a man,
right,
and very persistent about it, and then she's just like, okay, fine, like, you know, even though she really doesn't want to do that, doesn't make you feel a little weird?
one would hope. So I always talk about this in terms of compliance, coercion, and consent, right? So consent is not just yes means yes, but an enthusiastic hell yes, right? And we talk about, you know, in a truly healthy 100% consensual sexual interaction, we're talking about things. If you want to do something and I'm not, we don't do it. Or I might be like, okay, well, maybe we can try that, but I'm not sure. So it is an enthusiastic hell yes for consent. It's no means no is gone. It's out the window. We need an enthusiastic yes. We talk about compliance and coercion in the work that we do as well. So compliance, right? So what might that look like? You know, if my partner wants to do something and I'm not really into it or I don't want to, even just in the context of partnered sex, maybe I'll go along with that. And this is the compliance part because I don't want to lose the relationship. Yeah. I don't want a fight. I don't want an argument. I don't want something bad to happen. So I comply. I don't really want to. And so therefore it's not really 100%, right? Consensual because I don't really want to do it. I'm doing it because I fear the repercussions of not doing it. Right. The last thing we talk about is coercion, right? Like if you love me, baby kind of stuff, right? And that's, you know, really not consensual either because it's someone who ends up having that sexual encounter because like they're kind of like browbeaten into it or
it's manipulation period. Like it's guilt tripped into doing something that you don't want to do.
Yeah. So I actually want to go back to something around this sleeping thing and when we were talking about this, Eli, you had brought up the somnophilia, and I think this is a great spot for you to dig in there.
So for those of you that don't know, there's this fancy term called somnophilia. And I always do that sometimes. I don't know why I keep crossing it with phobia and philia. But somnophilia is a person who has sexual interest in someone that is sleeping. So you can also I think there's also a name called like the sleeping beauty syndrome or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
So reading this case reminded me of this film called The Sacred Killing of a Deer with Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman. And I think the character's name is Murphy. And he's a cardiologist. And there was this scene where Nicole Kidman plays Murphy's wife. I don't remember what her name is in the film, but they're both in the bedroom and they're talking, and I think they're getting ready to have sex or something like that. And Nicole Kidman's character goes, general anesthetic. And he goes, yes. So then next thing you know, he gets out of the bed and she's just pretending to be passed out from getting an anesthesia on the bed, and then he gets undressed and proceeds to have sex with her. So I was just like, that was the first time I've ever seen anything like that, and especially from doing what we do, right? I was just like, okay, what is that?
Right. And I've never seen that in a movie. And you're the movie person though, so.
Yeah, and I was just like, okay, what the hell is this? So I found out that it was somnophilia, and I was like, okay. And then reading this, I was like, okay, this sounds like this. But I mean, homeboy is just like bringing in all these guys and stuff, and I'm just like, okay, because it's even though I'm not saying that this would be okay if it was just him having sex with his passed out wife,
right? Still non-consensual.
It's still not consensual because again, comparing the whole situation from the movie to real life in the Pelicot case, Nicole Kidman saying general anesthetic is more of like a not only consent, but also in the BDSM community, they will call what is that called? Green. I will call it green light.
Like a green light, but
I guess green light
play, right? So if they're in a relationship,
code name. Yeah. That's what I meant to say. It was like a code word. So with her saying general,
clearly consensual, right? Yeah. She's saying, "Hey, let's play this game."
Right.
Yeah.
And they played the game. So that to me makes a lot of sense. And as far as having that kind of transaction of the code names and consent being implied when using that code name, not necessarily implied, but you know what I mean.
I mean, given, it sounds like,
more so given, right? But with this is just like completely wrong. And also, unbeknownst to Pelicot, there's the recording, there's the drugging, and all of that.
So many wretched things. But I mean, I think it's a good example of like, people are into what they're into, right? Like, that's fine. Do it like Nicole Kidman and Colin Farrell, right? Like that was, and I find that really interesting that was in a movie. But that's a clearly consensual thing that a couple has together. She says, "Hey, I'm willing to play this game," and boom, they do it, right? Versus someone who is non-consensually drugging someone, inviting other men in to rape her and recording it. But so again, it's like the somnophilia thing. Like any of the philias are not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how you play that out, right? And again, that's the same thing with like the rape fantasies. If you have rape fantasies, okay, that's in here. We don't play that out, right? We keep that in. But as we go through this series, we're going to rely on Eli for good movie references.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Awesome. And I mean, with this too, it's just like with Nicole Kidman's character, you know, the thing is that the important part here and the most obvious part here is that she was not given anesthesia. Even though she says general anesthetic, she's still sober, coherent. She's awake, but she's able to use a safe word if she feels uncomfortable at any point. Right. And the thing is that she's pretending while sober and coherent that she's pretending to be under anesthesia. She's pretending to be unconscious. Whereas Mr. Pelicot really made her unconscious. Drugged his wife and made her unconscious. Right. Absolutely. There's a difference. A huge difference. Enormous difference. Absolutely. But I think that's a great reference in terms of, and actually, surprisingly, when it comes to kinks, not going to lie, most movies don't do it right. Oh, yeah. It sounds like that was actually a pretty good representation of consensual, kink behavior. So that's awesome to know. I'm going to move through some of the other things before we kind of get into Mr. Pelicot himself and some of the things he said. So of the 50 men that were identified, they're all literally on trial, sitting in this courtroom looking at each other. 15 of them pled guilty. Right. So 15 of these 50 men, Mr. Pelicot being the 51st man, so 16 of 51 men have said, yes, I am guilty of this crime. I did this. I raped this woman. Obviously, Mr. Pelicot did much more, which leaves 35 of them who are pleading not guilty, right, for various and sundry reasons. Many of them saying they thought it was consensual. Their defense attorneys are saying, well, if there's no intention to rape, it's not rape. And, other things they're saying, right, they were lied to by the husband. They were manipulated by Mr. Pelicot. Therefore, they're not guilty. Go. And also, they were, in addition to that they were claiming that they were being manipulated by Mr. Pelicot. That they think there was a guy or maybe multiple guys that said that they were drugged by him as well. Because they didn't remember anything. Right. So, and Mr. Pelicot, in his defense, I guess, actually said, no, these guys know what they were doing. Yeah, he said these guys knew what the deal was. A lot of them would say, oh, I thought she was sleeping. I thought it was or she was pretending to be asleep. I thought it was role play. Yeah, he said that he had clearly informed all the men that he had drugged his wife without her consent and that they were invited to have sex with her unconscious body. That was his rebuttal. So aside from perhaps the legal reasons why someone would plead not guilty, which is not our purview, the not guilty is kind of bullshit. They did this, it's on video, and like with our guys that are doing internet crimes, like if it's on your computer, man, you can't fight that. It's yours. Yeah. But I also want to talk a little bit, like, because we work with so many folks who do commit sexual crimes, sexual offenses of various natures. Why, I want to talk a little bit, like, why would people deny that? And again, not from the legal sense where like their attorneys like, no, plead not guilty for whatever legal reasons, but internally, like what happens in your head that makes you be like, no, I didn't do that. Like, why psychologically would someone deny their guilt? So I always say, and I'll start and let you chime in. Like, when I'm talking about this, I always say, like, the brain is an amazing thing, right? Like, it can convince us that basically anything is real or true, even if it's totally not, right? And it's really a protective mechanism, right? It's kind of an internal defense mechanism that it's protective for them in a way, because if you actually
have to sit with your behavior and process what you've done and been like, oh shit, I was on this forum, I went to this guy's house and I had sex with his wife while she was drugged. A lot of people can't handle that, right? Like their internal psyche can't handle that. And so psychologically, it's a little easier to just be like, no, it wasn't me. Clearly, particularly for all of these guys on video, it was. But like, why do people deny guilt is more than a legal thing. There is a psychological piece to that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that too, where it's just like there's this separation of like who you are behind the screen and when you go do the behavior versus who you are. Like there's like the many masks that everyone wears, right? So
absolutely,
one mask where you're just like, okay, it's a regular day, you're not engaging into any of those thoughts and behaviors, you're in a completely different mindset. So when someone approaches you like a police officer saying, hey, we have reason to believe that you did X, Y, and Z, and you're just like, no, I didn't do no such thing. Like, what are you talking about? And then next thing you know, when you have evidence and they show you the evidence and give you the discovery of said evidence, then you're like, then it sits in with you. And you're like, okay, like, yeah, I did this. And then this when it's just like, in the beginning, everyone denies it. But then after it sits for a little bit, then next thing you know, they start coming clean about stuff because they want to get rid of that guilt and the shame. And the only way to do that is to take accountability.
Yeah, we talk about the anonymity of the internet, right, where people will do a lot of things online that they wouldn't necessarily do in person, right, the chats and things like that. But obviously these people moved that into actual behavior and that fantasy became reality. But it's the denial is an interesting thing. When I do a lot of teaching and we talk about denial as one of those defense mechanisms, when I teach law enforcement, the first time I heard it, I was like, this can't be real. And I have heard it subsequently for years in every class. And I always ask them, like, what's an example of denial? And always they'll talk about, like, in the process of arresting someone for, like, a possession of drug charge, the person will always be like, oh, these aren't my pants.
Not mine.
Not my pants. Not even not mine, but not my pants. The drugs are in the pants. I'm wearing the pants, but they are not my pants. And when I first heard that, I was like, of course they're your freaking pants, right? Like, you're wearing them. But it's that complete denial of reality, and that's protective, right? Obviously, when they're talking about that, they don't want to get arrested, and they think people are going to buy that it's not their pants. But it's that protective mechanism of, shit, I got to acknowledge what I did if I actually look at that. And most people don't want to go into that deep, dark place of being like, oh, I am the kind of person who can do this, right? And again, we hear this all the time when things happen in the U.S. too, but all the people in this little town are like, they're just real people, right? They're plumbers and accountants, and they're just real people, and they don't look right like a sex offender. So it's hard to take in, and they are just normal, quote unquote, people who then end up doing this horrendous thing. So it's easy to deny. The brain wants to deny that because otherwise it shatters our sense of self, right? And you have to say, oh God, I am the kind of person who in the right circumstances will rape someone.
Yeah,
most people's psyches can't handle that.
Yeah, and I think that, and you say a good point right there too, right? Because when you talk about cases like these to a lot of people, they're all like, oh, I couldn't, like, who would do such a thing? I would never do something like that. Just like, you don't know what you wouldn't do until you do it. Because anyone could be pushed to, because when it comes to the offending behavior, right, and I've had these conversations with our offending guys, right, where it's just like, okay, before you started looking at this kind of material, did you think that you would even get access to this stuff to start looking at it? And 100% of the time, they always say no. They would have never thought that they would have gotten here. So if they thought that they wouldn't get here, what makes you think that you would never do something like that?
Mm-hmm. No, I always say when I talk to people, usually not clients, but sort of people out in the world talking about the work that I do, I'll often say, I don't never say never when someone's like, I would never do that, because in the quote unquote right circumstances, and I mean that is opportunistic, like you never know what people are going to do. And I don't think we all know what we're going to do unless we're in a certain situation. Right. So you just, to say never, I mean, one would hope, right? And I think for many, many people, it would be it would require drastic and extreme circumstances for certain things, but
absolutely
not for everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about how Mr. Pelicot got caught.
That was.
And then a little bit about addiction versus offending. So this was actually in one of the later articles, the more recent articles. They shared about how he was arrested. And so he was originally arrested because he was upskirting a woman in a grocery store. And so then obviously that gave them probable cause to look at his tech. But I was just like, oh God, that makes sense, right? And so it's not we can't diagnose anybody we haven't met, but it might be more than coupling, because what is upskirting? So that's voyeurism, right? So for those of you who aren't in our dark world and don't know, upskirting is when you take an image of someone, literally upskirt or shorts or something like that, without their knowledge, right? So it is voyeuristic. You're doing this without their knowledge. For some people, that's for their own pleasure, right? They're trying to get a picture of a vagina or someone's sexual anatomy. For some of them, it's the zing, right, is in the taking of the picture. But for some people, they keep them. It's their own stash, and they do what they do with them. And then other folks, there are upskirt websites all over the internet. And so a lot of people are then uploading these to forums or websites or all sorts of different things. And that's how, it's not as uncommon, I think, as we would like to think, the upskirting and the voyeurism.
Okay.
But I thought that was interesting how he got caught. I don't know if you had anything you want to share.
With that, right, and I'm going to bring this up later, but I think a lot of the times when it comes to voyeurs, one of the common themes I see with voyeurs is the fear of rejection, because you are able to capture that moment not only with your eyes but also recording it, so you save it for later.
Maybe masturbate to it later or something.
Masturbate to it later. There's no rejection because you're clandestine, right? So you're taking mental recordings or even legitimate recordings of someone in their most intimate positions, right? Or situations, most intimate situations. And you have that for yourself, even though that's something that you would have wanted. But if you would have, after actually talked to that person about doing something with them or anything like that, or even, going through the whole vetting stages of getting to the point to see someone in that intimate way, all that is scary. And you can very well get rejected either like within the first stage of trying to get to that, the end goal, or even along the way. So a lot of these guys like to just say, all right, well, what is the least chaotic, least hurtful to
least
me,
least
vulnerable to me, in order to get what I want without getting hurt.
So we end up perpetrating against somebody else.
You end up perpetrating and offending.
And folks, for some of them, the zing is really about like the person not knowing, right? So there's a bit of kind of getting off on the fact that I'm doing this and the person doesn't know that. So it also, when I teach, and again, frequently law enforcement, they're like, well, what's the chance of escalation? And we don't always necessarily know that. But obviously it's always possible. And again, I don't know this case. I only know what I've read from, the news articles, but, perhaps this was escalation, right? And perhaps he started upskirting or doing these voyeuristic things, and maybe it escalated into the hands-on perpetration. It's a possibility. Some people escalate, some people don't. But when I finally saw it, I was like, oh, that's how he got caught, right? Like, that makes sense. And then they're looking at his tech, and then they're going, oh, this is not just upskirting. This is something horrifyingly different than that. And then Mr. Pelicot, in some of what he shared at the trial, because it's all been totally open to the public, he stated that he tried to stop the addiction, but his addiction was too strong. And I think we hear this all the time in the work that we do, because there's some camps that don't think like sex addiction is a real thing. Some do. But then in the working with the offender world, we talk about sexual compulsivity or hypersexuality as a dynamic risk factor, as a piece of what goes into that. Dr. Cito talks about in his motivation facilitation model of offending that, high sex drive, hypersexuality, sexual compulsivity, sex addiction, things like that can be a motivation for offending. So we hear that all the time. And we often hear, like, if a celebrity gets busted having an affair or something, they're like, oh, sex addict, go to rehab. But I wanted us to talk a little bit about, and to just be very clear about the difference between sex addiction and sex offending, and to know where we go with that.
Yeah.
So do you want to take that, or do you want me to roll?
You could take that one. That's fine.
All right. So we talk about explanations and not excuses for our guys as well. Yeah. So what lots of people can have an addiction, right? Escalation, out of control, unable to stop things. This is not perhaps the place to go into the formal like definitions or diagnostic criteria for compulsive sexual behavior. But, for many people, they can have that and it never escalates into offending, right? So the offending is a behavior, legal term for behavior, right? Doing something illegal around sex and sexuality, either with a live victim, like in this case with rape, or with the CSAM clients, right? We're viewing images of people being assaulted. So it might be part of what's going on, but it's absolutely like not everyone with an addiction offends, and not everyone who offends is an addict. And I do think sometimes it can be used as an excuse.
I do think that with differentiating between addiction and offending, there's that line, right? Where it's just like you can still be in your addiction and be high, right? And cross into your offending threshold. Right. But you can also just stay in what you get, where your kick is.
Right.
You could just stay there. It's easily available. You can, when it comes to there are guys that go to these sites and stuff like that, just like the regular Pornhub type stuff, right? And they don't venture out into the nether realms of illegal or obscure kind of porn, or they just, because you do have the guys that are engaging in prostitution, and then they can catch legal charges for that, or the massage
parlors, yep.
Yeah, and things like that. So I was treading very lightly because of bringing those up, because that can get kind of confusing sometimes for some people, because obviously that's where you can still get charges.
Absolutely.
Even though you're engaging in, the addict is engaging in their addictive behaviors, that can still
cross that. Yeah. I think when we're working with folks, we do believe that pieces of sexuality or sexual addiction, compulsive sexual behavior disorder is a real thing. It's part of how we roll. And this is years ago. I kind of did a little study within my own cases, and this is a long time ago. And it was not exactly, but roughly half and half of our guys here for legal charges based on, the HIV, the HIBI and the SAST fit sexual compulsivity, and the other half didn't. So it's one of those things that, I think a lot of people are like, oh, you're a sex addict, right? That's why you offended. That's bullshit. You're just using that as an excuse.
Right.
And are some people doing that? Absolutely, right? There are some people that are like, oh, I'm an addict, I couldn't stop. There are actually some people for whom this is a compulsive behavior. And again, explanations, not excuses, right? That perhaps that escalates, their compulsion escalates, or it's just an underlying thing when it comes to treatment that we have to address. But again, in no way saying like, oh, if you have, compulsive sexual behavior, it's an excuse, because there's tons of people in the world who have that struggle, who do not offend, right? Who do not violate anyone's bodies or behaviors or boundaries or anything like that. So I just noted that, right? Because I guess it always bothers me a little bit, right? When I see that in the news, and it's like, oh, great. It's somebody else is going to be like, oh, look at this guy. He did all of these horrible things. And he's going to say, oh, I did it because I'm a sex addict. And so I felt we needed to explain that, because... Yeah, because a lot of the times when people hear that, and then it kind of paints the real addict as someone who has... anyone has the capacity to do horrible things. But when someone else that has not committed an offense or an offending behavior, but still says that they're an addict, particularly a sex addict or a porn addict, then for someone who's just like, oh, you're a sex addict, so that's what you of everything, like that's your excuse. And it's just like, well, like don't paint all the sex addicts as somebody that's you trying to use that as an excuse. Right. And so from a treatment perspective, and I know we haven't really talked about that at all, but that's what we do, right? We treat people either with the sex addiction or with the offending behavior, or both. We always do assess if somebody has sexual compulsivity issues, because that's something we treat, right? That's something we want to work on as an underlying, one of potentially many underlying behaviors, right? So we work on that root cause in addition to, the behaviors that we do. But it gets touchy, right? Like every time a celebrity gets caught doing something, they go to sex rehab. And I think it, for the public, sometimes becomes a joke. And it's not. So it's, I have no idea whether or not he has compulsive sexual behavior disorder or not. When I heard him say that, I was like, oh, okay, right. Like, what's the media response to that going to be? Or is it an excuse when maybe it is an underlying issue?
Amazing.
The last thing I want to talk about is the victim in this case, this amazing, amazing woman, Giselle Pelicot. She has become this icon in France for women, and for a couple of reasons, right? And so in the U.S., right, we keep victims' names private. We normally don't show videos in the courtroom because they're horrible, right? You are literally watching sexual assault. And this amazing woman has shown up to this trial every single day, sits in there, listens to all of this, and it's public. And so anybody can show up. So it's a courtroom full of people. There is an overflow room for the public. And her thing is, no, right? I want to put the shame back on the accused. I want to put the shame on the offender. I want to work to get rid of the shame on the victim, right? She did nothing wrong. She didn't know what was going on. And she actually fought and won to have the actual videos of her sexual assault played in the courtroom. And her quote is to look rape straight in the eyes. And it played in the courtroom. It played in the overflow room where the general public was. And that's something unheard of. And I think amazing, right? That she was very brave and just wanted to be like, no, fuck that. I'm not taking this. This is you guys. And you have to see what this is. And we need to stop being blind or willfully ignorant of what actually is going on. So she just, to me, this woman is, after everything she went through, she is so amazing and becoming, in France, she's, like I said, she's this sort of feminist icon. And it's astounding.
Yeah, I think that this is a great show and an example of, women who finally are just being, in particular, the former Miss Pelicot, like taking the behaviors and even that are also the same behaviors that are attached to the male culture, right? And just being like, look what you guys are co-signing, like for generations, right? Because the ages of everyone ranges from like 26 to 74.
Oh, it's everybody.
So
right?
it crosses a span of multiple generations, and it's just like, this needs to stop. This shows that, she's showing that you men need to stop this shit. Mm-hmm. Because it's just like that, for all of these reasons, you're doing this to a woman. There's many different women that this has been done to.
Clearly, I mean, she is clearly just a very public example because of how it's gone. But how many, millions of women all over the world experience similar assaults?
Yeah, and it's just like, you guys, and like she said before, like the shame needs to be deferred to the perpetrators, and that should happen, because if you don't have the shame, then you won't change.
Right. And I think as a culture, and whether that's US or France or as just a global culture, unless we're actually willing to look at it, what's going to change, right? And I've had to, early on in my career when working on cases, CSAM, child sexual abuse material cases, we had to go to the customs house in Philadelphia and actually sit with the FBI agent and look at the videos and the pictures of the child sexual assault. Yeah. That never leaves you.
And I've even told you too, like when we get discoveries and you have to read that shit, that never leaves you.
that never leaves your brain.
No, you have a very good imagination. No, like that doesn't leave your mind either.
No, and so but in a way it's good. And she's basically doing that, right? She's basically saying, y'all can't hide anymore, right? We're not going to put this behind closed doors. We're not going to just show this for the judge and the attorneys. Every one of you needs to look at this in the face and see what the hell is going on and not hide from the reality anymore, which is, whew, I mean, like, I don't even have words for how amazing that is, but also how hard that is, because literally the whole world is watching her get raped.
Yeah. And it's just, and if it doesn't turn your stomach, then obviously there's an issue.
Yes.
But it's just that, you know, that's the point, though. The point is to turn your stomach. So you actually, like, there was a guy that made a comment about this and saying that he's tired of hearing about things like this going on, like when it paints men in a bad light, and saying that this kind of behavior needs to stop. And it's just like that. But if it wasn't for this case and many others, right, for this particular gentleman here, it wouldn't have had this fire in him to kind of just be like, listen, like, we as men, we have to knock this off. We have to do something to change. And
no, he was actually kind of interesting to see that, because that was in an article that was really just about the effects on that little town. It's this little tiny town in France, and he was one of the people who lived in that town and was like, no, we can't hide anymore. And so I was very proud of him for kind of being on the right side of that and saying, no, we as men, right, need to do something.
And I think that's also shows the issue of Mr. Pelicot. What all this says to me about him is that he is entitled, and he feels as though he can't handle rejection. He can't handle the fact that his wife rejected him and cheated on him. So he does this in order to feel some kind of sense of retribution, or some sense of like
control.
This is control. This is mine. You know, this is my wife, and you did this. So this is something that's mine.
Going to use you as a possession to do with what I want.
And it's just like, because that's all these behaviors to me are about, like even the upskirting and you know, having sex while she's unconscious, you know, because you don't get rejected that way.
Right. And it's also relating to the objectification of women, right? That women, and particularly his wife in this case, and women in the upskirting, like, what is she? She's not a human in that moment. She is this objectified being, right, that he can use and abuse to help him work out whatever sexual fantasies or sexual things he has going on. So this case to me, again, was like amazing, because for so many reasons, right? First, the victim is an inspiration, right, to people, not just women, men get raped too, but to victims everywhere, to be like, nah, I'm done carrying your shame. You get the shame back. I'm not holding it. It's yours. And to be very public. So it's an inspiration that way, whether it was just to try to get some sentence mitigation or not, for the perpetrator to very publicly say, I am a rapist. He didn't just say I did it. He didn't say I'm guilty. He said, I am a rapist. And so are all of these men. I thought that was a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
And it also was very intriguing to me about what it brings up about consent, right? And again, this is France. They have different rules about consent, and how not only is this, you know, kind of transfixing a nation, right, with all this horrible stuff going on, but it's also making them literally rethink the legal definition, right, of what rape is, and how to manage that. So there's just so much deep stuff in here. And not gonna lie, I was more than a little distressed that there was one news outlet. Now, clearly I don't read every newspaper, but, you know, I read all of our local stuff, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and some other things. The only place I saw this was the New York Times until this Saturday, which is over a month, right, past the start of this trial. And that, again, we're biased, right? Like, this is what we do, but people need to know this stuff, right? And you know, for her bravery, right, I think that needs to be acknowledged. So I just thought it was a very interesting case for us to talk about as our first Sex in the News, because there's offending, there's voyeurism, there's upskirting, there's consent, there's, you know, kinks and paraphilias, there's victim, you know, bravery. There's just so much wrapped into one case that clearly we could talk for well over an hour about it.
Oh yeah, yeah. And plus, like it gives it's also a different story compared to the Epstein Diddy
Stuff.
stuff. I mean, this is a little similar because of the recording and all that stuff, but at the same, it's still different. It's just another story to kind of explore and just be like this is another indicator of how we need to change.
Yeah,
Change needs to happen.
Absolutely. There's been, unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to have a lack of things to talk about when it comes to sex in the news, because there's, and again, not everything we're going to talk about is going to be offending, but I think there's a lot that we're never going to have nothing to talk about, which is unfortunate as well. So I want to end with saying thank you, Eli, for joining us. I'm going to give all the little shout outs. So Eli and I work at Sexual Addiction Treatment Services. All of the info will be in the details of this video. Eli also has a private practice where he really likes to work with young men because he's badass at it. So you want to give us what that is?
So my practice is careaway counseling, and I generally want to work with younger men in order to kind of get people, especially when it comes to things like this, as far as getting comfortable with rejection, getting comfortable with building up confidence and building your self-esteem, and also just to deal with the past traumas, because a lot of men don't want to talk about that kind of thing. Because we feel as though there is no space for men to talk about, the moments where we have been weak,
hurt, vulnerability, all of those things.
Vulnerable, abused even. So, and I feel like that amongst other men, we need to do that, because we as men, we model how to work through it and build resilience.
Absolutely. Yeah. So other things, you can see some of my writings and some other videos on drjensrecoveryreadings.com. And I do believe Eli has a site where he specifically is looking at, or maybe your TikTok, specifically looking at movies and their relation to psychology and everything that we do. So please share.
If you guys follow me at the movie therapist on TikTok, that's where I am. And then eliirving.blog is also where I do more writing on the movies and in relation to psychology. But you could check that out as well.
And that's basically why Eli and I are doing this together, because we both, I don't know what it's a sign of, but we are voracious readers. We are voracious
writers,
observers of things in the news, and we also like to write. So we're a good match for that. So thanks everybody for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.